Welcome, welcome. I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to get in the room with us and get your sound going so that we don't start without your computer. Who knew that we would be participating in conferences and we would have to worry about not just ourselves getting into the room, but our computer too. And even though the computer is supposed to be smarter than us, it's usually slower than us, I've decided. Okay. So we are before the lunch hour, and this is one of the sessions that I am more excited about. I got to hear Dr. Ortega at the National Association of Drug Court Professionals conference a couple of years ago and just fell in love with the material. If you know me really well, you know this is sort of stuff I like to talk about and participate in anyway. So I'm thrilled that she agreed to be here. I'm not reading her bio. If you want to see how impressively qualified she is to talk about this, you can read her speaker information on the landing page. And she can tell you whatever she would like for you to know about herself right this second. I don't want to take up all the time with my talking. Let's hear her. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the next speaker, who is Dr. Ortega. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope that you had a chance to take a few deep breaths as you watch this short video created by my awesomely amazing aspiring filmmaker grandson, Quincy Campbell. If you haven't taken those breaths, I want to encourage you to do it now before we dive in. Just take a nice, deep, cleansing breath. Inhale, exhale. I know you've had a morning And so, and I know it's almost lunchtime, so just take a deep breath, and let it go. As you heard, I'm Dr. Bridget Ortega, and I am thrilled to be here. My thanks to the Tennessee Association of Recovery Court Professionals, and a special thank you to Marie Crossan, who extended the invitation for me to be here. I'm especially grateful that there is a place on your agenda this year to talk about justice and compassion. You see, that has been my life work for the past, let's see, well, as long as I can remember. For me, justice and compassion are two sides of the same coin. So today we're going to talk about compassionate jurisprudence, because in my mind, there's no justice without compassion. And this was a beautiful, this was beautifully and artfully stated by several judges over the last year. I've seen it in digital newsletters, I've seen it in writings. And so this session is all about what does or should compassion look like in your day-to-day as a dispenser of justice. So you're in luck. For the next few minutes, I'm going to actually show you what compassionate practice looks like for justice professionals. So strap in, open your mind, and let's go on a journey. So let's start with what compassionate jurisprudence doesn't look like. It absolutely does not look like this. And it certainly doesn't look like what I experienced as a 14-year-old back in 1969, which is when I had my first encounter with the criminal justice system. So let me set the stage. My grandmother, who raised me, shot and killed a guy in self-defense. I know it was self-defense because I witnessed the whole thing. Nevertheless, she was charged and the wheels of justice began to turn. Yeah, that's me there in the middle. 2 years go by and we find ourselves in a courtroom in Cuyahoga County where she pled to a no jail sentence. Now, mind you, I didn't know anything about the criminal justice system or the full implication of what was happening. All I know is that mom was coming home, my sisters and I were thrilled. We were standing in that courtroom with family, friends, and church members, eagerly anticipating the final declaration that this nightmare was over. But the 16-year-old me was in for a shock that day, a real shock to my sense of justice and fairness. As I listened to the sentencing judge berate my mom in front of us, her children, her friends, the church members who had spoken and written letters on her behalf, she was demeaned, told that she was a person incapable of making good decisions, and worst of all, that she was a terrible mom. He said that the only reason he was agreeing to this plea deal was his utmost respect for my mom's attorney, the attorney that had cost us our home, our car, and every dime our family could scrape up. That attorney had assured him that she would be on her best behavior. All of a sudden, standing in that courtroom, I felt my entire body go rigid and hot, and I was mad. I was so angry. Not only were the words hurtful, they were unkind and unnecessary, but they were also untrue. It was but, but all of that being said, as you can tell, it's still a visceral, it evokes a visceral response for me. But I have to tell you, that was a single defining moment that birthed in me a determination to seek justice. So fast forward, I go to college, then to law school. I start off in corporate law, where I made a lot of money, but it did not appeal to my sense of justice. I then moved to a medium-sized insurance defense firm with some friends. Again, My sense of justice was not appeased. From there, I went to the Santa Clara County Public Defender's Office with the heavy caseloads and crowded calendars. My then husband kept telling me my career path was moving in the wrong direction, but I was chasing justice and I felt it was eluding me. Then one day I found myself sitting and watching the Sotomayor confirmation hearings, where I watched the word empathy become a dirty word in the context of judging. It was in that moment that a light bulb came on, and I realized why people believe that compassion does not belong in our courts. The problem was this lady and the narrative she brings with her. I want you to meet Lady Justice. You see how she's holding that scale nice and even, usually in her left hand, because supposedly she measures the strengths and support and opposition of a case. Those scales are purported to represent equal justice under the law. You see her carrying a double-edged sword in her right hand, symbolizing the power of reason and justice, which may be wielded either for or against any party. You see how she's blindfolded? Because justice should be meted out objectively, without fear or favor, regardless of race, ethnicity, money, power, or weakness, because she's blind to difference. In most depictions, she's made of bronze. She is hard and cold and dispassionate. No emotion, no feelings, no empathy. You see, in America, justice is powerful, justice is supposedly equal, and justice is dispassionate. And all of the literature supports this. No emotions, no feelings, no empathy. This is the traditional narrative of our American court system. And I decided to challenge that. So I started asking some questions, you see. Why is it that people lack confidence in our courts? Let's face it, it's not unusual to see a lot of really ticked off people in the courthouse. Why are recidivism rates so high? Why do we lock so many people up in this country? Why do my friends and peers laugh at me when I say that my life's work involves compassionate justice? Is a detached and dispassionate judge a good thing? In other words, is it a bad thing for a judge to be empathetic, like the good senators kept insisting in the Sotomayor confirmation hearings? In asking myself these questions, I started to ponder a theory that we servants of the law, judges, probation, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and all the partners that work with us, we have to care about the people coming into the court in order for people to feel that justice has been served. We must care. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to challenge you to think about things a little bit differently. I want to introduce you to and ask you to embrace a model that I call compassionate jurisprudence. Compassionate jurisprudence is all about practicing compassion in court settings. So here's the definition. Compassionate jurisprudence is a set of practices used by judges, justice professionals, and their community partners that allows them to understand the feelings and perspectives of court-involved people and to use that understanding to guide their actions and decision-making for the betterment of the individuals involved in court proceedings. A nice, long, lengthy, lawyerly sentence. It's compassionate jurisprudence is the antecedent to procedural justice. I mean, what makes people feel that they are fairly treated? Compassionate jurisprudence is necessary for restorative justice. and its redemptive qualities of repairing harm caused by bad behavior. It is the catalyst for creating the safety, voice, and choice and empowerment of trauma-informed approaches. Compassionate jurisprudence breaks down barriers and encourages equity. Compassionate jurisprudence is the how behind therapeutic jurisprudence, which makes courtrooms places that positively influence an individual's mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness. In spite of years of historical narrative making compassion and empathy taboo in courtrooms, compassion is happening. Chief Justice Brennan back in 1988 said it so artfully. Judging, and although my research deals with judges, I want to submit to you that this applies to all of us justice professionals. Judging properly understood involves the interaction of reason and passion, logic and experience, and a dialogue between the head and the heart. Now, I happen to agree with Justice Brennan. Find my little cursor. Sorry, I happen to agree with Chief Justice Brennan because compassion is the foundational principle of everything we do with people if we want a good outcome. And that's all of us. So my journey took a different path. And with the click of my heels, I became a researcher. I did a research study here in Georgia with 28 treatment court judges that I observed and 22 drug court judges that I recruited for dialogue. The requirements were they had to have at least 1 year of experience. You know, I decided that I would start with treatment courts because I figured if I were going to find compassion in courts, that would be where I would most probably see it. And what I was looking for was a formula that I could evolve into a practice, a set of practices. So these 28 judges had to have 1 year of experience on the bench. They were all here in Georgia, and there were a variety, urban, rural, Appalachian, and coastal regions. I mean, it was a long 6 months in my car and a lot of miles. Felony drug courts, vet courts, family treatment courts, and mental health courts. I looked at them all. And then 22 drug court judges, treatment court judges were recruited for dialogue. So here's the breakdown of the courts that I looked at. Most of them were felony drug courts. In second place were veterans courts, about 13%. And then I looked at mental health courts, about 10%, and 7% family treatment courts. And remember, I was observing for compassionate behavior. And the compassionate behavior that I was looking for came from the SCAD hypothetical elements of compassion. You know, doctors and hospitals and the medical field, they have done a lot of work in this area, trying to get healthcare workers, healthcare professionals to really exhibit more bedside manner, right? More compassion. Because all of the research tells us that when healthcare professionals are compassionate, people tend to heal faster and better. And so I decided, okay, I would adopt that model and pull the elements from the medical model and then use this to develop a observation tool. So as you can see, these are the elements, and we'll go into more detail about these. I studied patterns of behavior while the judges went about their regular course of business. I recorded their dialogue, the nature of their dialogue, physical touch, room and time for dialogue, as well as patterns of behavior. I recorded the frequency and context of behaviors of the judge. For example, how much time they spent with a particular person that was in front of them. And this is what I found out. I found out that the judges, was consistent across the board. Um, they were really good at attentive listening. Um, that listening that says, I hear what you're saying because I value who you are, that listening for understanding. It's different than active listening where you parrot back what the person says so that they know that you heard them. It's the kind of listening that's used in motivational interviewing, but even more than that, it's a supercharged listening because you are listening to understand. Forbearance, I'm going to put up with your stuff a little while longer because I believe in you. Kind of what we do with our kids, you know. Firm, but I'm still hanging in there with you. I'm not going to give up on you. There was a lot of concern that was expressed for the individuals that appeared before the court, not only from the judge, but all of the team uh, that was there. People were concerned about the individuals. If things were not going well in their lives, that concern was expressed. If things were happening with their families, I saw sympathy cards being signed for the loss of a loved one. It was genuine concern, not the fake. None of the judges had any problem explaining things, and sometimes over and over and over again if the person just wasn't getting it, or they would break and have someone else try to explain something. Or if a person had a question and had a legitimate question with regard to what was going on, people were very, very, the judges all were really good at providing that explanatory communication. Patience. Some of these courts ran into the night hours. I mean, the judges exhibited great patience. They weren't in a hurry to rush through the calendar. They really made sure that each person was seen and heard. And then one of the things, another compassionate behavior was having an introductory or closing statement. There was always a pleasantry coming into the courtroom, which really set the mood for the entire room, and then always closed on a positive note. Some other behaviors that I observed that were consistent across the board, and I observed a lot of things, but these are the things that were consistent. Honoring the person, even if they were messing up, there was great respect for the individual. And if they messed up, they were spoken to in a way that let them know that I care about you, that I honor you as a person. You can do better than this. Consideration. So the team and the judges were willing to hear what people had to say and consider it. If they had ideas about what should happen in their particular case, or an idea about different treatment options or things of that nature, the judge was willing to listen to that and consider it. And if they didn't agree with them, tell them why. A lot of attention to detail. Um, if a person looked really sharp, they were told they looked really sharp. If Johnny had a new hat on, he was complimented. If she did something different to her appearance, it was that attention to detail. That is a compassionate behavior. It says, I see you. And of course, in these problem solving courts, there's always familiarity over time because you see them on a regular basis and a consistent basis. So familiarity over time says, hey, I remember what happened last week or the week before or last month, or what you looked like when you first got here, and now look at you. So acknowledging that you have a relationship, you have established a relationship with that person. Very liberal on um, incentives and also non-punitive sanctions. So the judges were going to use the hammer when it was required, but I saw a lot of avoidance in doing that. And I observed staffings. I didn't say that at the beginning, but not only was I in court observing the court proceedings, and I would sit back. So after a while, they forgot I was even there. But in the staffings, this is where you would see judges were really resistant to locking people up if they could help it, but they would do it if they had to. And again, just observing their demeanor, it was up, it was positive, leaning in to address people. These were compassionate behaviors that I exhibited across the board. Do we have any questions so far, Marie? Any questions? All right.
I must have lost my audio. Can you hear me?
And now I can.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For a minute there, I thought.
Like, where did she go?
I thought I froze for a minute.
No, sorry about that. My audio must have done something weird. Not right now. No, I have put in the chat that if folks, oh, we got one pop up. If the definition of justice is fair treatment, everyone deserves justice. The process or result of using laws to fairly judge people accused of crimes and the quality of being fair or just, they were treated with justice. Is it possible that compassion interferes with logical judgment or ruling? Do I need to read that again?
No.
Okay.
Is it possible that, I think the question's at the end, is it possible that compassion interferes with justice or ruling? I mean, anything's possible, but as you will see, it's not inconsistent for those two things to exist in the same space. And I think these courts demonstrated that on a regular basis because they actually were empathetic, but they also were able to dispense justice.
And then we have a second, I'm sorry, there's a second question.
That's
Were you going to comment further? Okay. The second question, did the length of time on the bench determine compassionate jurisprudence?
Again,
I think you said 2 years, right? They had to have at least been on a year?
They had to have been on at least 1 year so that they were really familiar with the process, the procedure, had established their own pattern and way of doing things. And they had some knowledge of, some extended knowledge of people that were on their calendar.
And so did you notice a difference in their results, I guess, depending on the length of time they were on the bench?
I think the only difference that I really noted was comfort level. So I think judges that had been around for a longer period of time, they were able to, they felt more comfortable on the bench and comfortable with the process. I think newer judges less so. But again, the behaviors that I pulled out and shared here are behaviors that were exhibited across the board. So all of them did these things to some degree or another.
That's it, that we don't have any other in the queue right now.
Okay. So the phase two of the research project got much more interesting. 22 of the 28 judges agreed to stick around and engage in a 4-week conversation with me. It was on an online platform that was hosted by the West Education Network, TWIN. I do work at a law school, so I had access to that. They were assigned a pseudonym and a cohort. And each day, 5 days a week for 4 weeks, I would post a question. And the first question was their thoughts about my observations, right? Their thoughts about the subject of their thoughts about the subject of compassion, and whether they felt they were compassionate, and whether they felt that was an important part of what they were doing on the bench. And so I went through this with them every day. I would post a question. It was an asynchronous platform so that they could um, check in anytime within a 48-hour period, because I would leave one question up for 2 days and then I would remove it to encourage them to move on to the next. So they were dialoguing with each other for this 4 weeks about the various things that I was asking. And this is what I found. And this was really, really a lot more interesting to me than the observations even. These were the things that they considered compassionate before I even told them, share with them my response. Careful listening, which matches the attentive listening that I had observed. Respect for the other person and their point of view, they felt was compassionate. Language was a key part of compassion, being respectful, non-threatening, and clear. Praise and encouragement is compassionate. Smiling and eye contact. Time spent lets people know you care. So making them feel like you are not rushing was how one judge put it. Again, set time, not important. It's what the person needs in the moment. Judges indicated that anger is not helpful at all. It's important not to let disappointment drive the moment, but all of those moments are teachable moments. Judges hated people that lied, kissed up, or were being disingenuous, and they felt that that inhibited their ability to be compassionate. And then self-disclosure is a way to show that you too are human. I remember in one courtroom, a judge talking about his own journey through recovery. So self-disclosure, when it's appropriate, is a way to show that you're human. Body language, tone, humor, and presence, being in the moment helps to connect. Others, a lot of them would share stories to drive home a point. One of the purposes of the study was to figure out whether there are behaviors that can transfer to a traditional court as well. And that was really interesting to hear what the judges had to say about that. Because it's one thing to be in a treatment court where everyone's up and clapping and laughing and having a good time, or working as a team. But it's another thing to handle a regular calendar, especially a criminal court calendar. And all of the judges, treatment court was not the only thing that they did. Some were civil, some had criminal calendars, some had both. And so the discussion around what's transferable from this study to a traditional calendar was very interesting. And one of those points was ending strong and positive with an individual and setting the tone in the courtroom. The judges felt like that was something they absolutely could do on any calendar. Walking into the courtroom, setting the tone. And I saw, I actually went back and observed one of the judges' calendar, regular criminal calendar. And unlike the criminal calendars that I was familiar with as a defense attorney, which was what I was in my prior life, the courtroom was very calm. it wasn't, even though there were a lot of people in it, there wasn't a lot of hustle and bustle and people running around. It was really a calm environment. And he felt that that carried over from his treatment court experience, and it was a good thing. So these were the questions that I asked going into the study. And this addresses the question of the whoever the individual was that asked the first question. Can compassion and traditional perceptions of judging coexist in American courtrooms and give way to a new paradigm? That was one of the research questions that I set out to answer. And the answer is yes. Judging is a human process, and as such, different judges run their courtrooms in different ways. This is not only true in traditional courts, but also in the accountability court form of judging. The judges observed in this study assumed varying positions of proximity and formality upon entry into the courtroom. Judges, most of them were robed and seated in a position of authority, as in a traditional proceeding. There were a few that stood at the podium to be closer to the participants, and 2 judges did not even wear a robe. So that's very, very different. Sorry, I'm trying to manage. Although judges generally made attempts to create a warm and supportive environment with upbeat attitudes, humor, and smiles, traditional judges generally made attempts to create a warm and supportive environment with upbeat attitudes, humor, and smiles directed at the whoever was in the courtroom. But none of the observed courts that I saw rose to the formality of a traditional court. But they did maintain the relics of, like I said, being robes, sitting in a position of authority, assuming that position of authority, and letting people know that I'm the person in charge here. There was a mix of compassionate behavior and traditional court behavior from the onset in these treatment courts. So the answer to my first question was yes, that these 2 things can coexist in American courtrooms. And I'm going to show you how in a second. The other question that I had, did just talking about compassionate behaviors in drug courts influence judges to think differently about the process and their behavior? And the answer to that question, the answer to that question was yes. The dialogue was fascinating. Judges sent follow-up questions throughout the night and the day. They went in and out of the forum at different times of the day, as did I. The basis of the questions were what I had observed in their courtrooms. And none of the judges knew who the other judges were. And I think that made, in this dialogue forum, so I think it made them more prone to be candid. The discussions were introspective, they were thoughtful, and sometimes respectfully contentious. One example is the whole issue of fees, whether fees should be assessed to people that are poor or people that are struggling. And that was a really, really spirited conversation. And one judge felt that, hey, it's a matter of accountability, and even said if they could buy drugs, they could pay these fees. And another judge felt like they'll impose the fees, but they will, if they're successful in the program, they dismiss the fees. Or the other judges give them opportunity to do community service or something pro-social to work it off. So that was a very spirited conversation that showed actually the balancing, because accountability always came up in this conversation, in every conversation with the judges. Accountability never left the table. So here are the areas where dialogue influenced thought. Um, oops. Oops. I have too many things going on here. Okay, so the transfer of compassionate behaviors from drug courts to traditional courts. Dialogue definitely influenced thought on that. That was a spirited discussion as well. And the judges landed on the fact that there are many things that they could actually transfer from treatment court to traditional courts. The fee discussion was a spirited discussion, which I shared with you. All of them exchanged new ideas or things that they were going to try out in their courtrooms that they may not have thought of before. And then judges' legacy was something that they talked about. They wanted to be known for making a positive impact on their community and felt that these courts were a way to be able to do that. Judges also talked about the differences between the things that could not be transferred in traditional court. One thing they can't do one-on-one with the litigants is speak to them directly because they're represented by counsel. But another judge indicated that there are opportunities, at sentencing is one area where you get a chance to do that. They talked about they could ask permission. There were a violation of probation. There's lots of opportunities where they actually could possibly influence the individuals that are standing before them. And also in civil proceedings as well, judges all the time talk to people to try to get them to move towards an agreement. So it is possible to transfer some of these things, thinking outside the box, being courteous, problem solving, making eye contact, attentively listening. These are all things that judges can do in traditional court that do not impact their ability to judge. A big misconception of compassion is that it's soft, and it's not. It's not inconsistent with dispensing justice. Compassionate practice yields better outcomes. If you're really interested in stopping revolving doors and helping people to solve problems, these practices help you to get there. Compassionate practice is already occurring in courts, as I indicated, in traditional settings. Making eye contact. How many times have I been in court and seen a judge never look up from the bench at the individuals? But many judges do. Dialogue is a critical element of compassionate practice. And when I talk about dialogue, I'm talking about an exchange, not just one party talking. And these practices are not only for the litigants that appear before the court, but it's how we treat one another, how we speak to one another in court. Compassionate practice can be learned. So what does this mean for you? Dialogue is powerful. Compassionate demeanor humanizes. Time is important. So slow down. Words matter. Transferability of behaviors to traditional court. Think about what you're doing in treatment court if you have one, and think about what you can do in your regular court calendar that is common. And then transferability to other disciplines, especially in criminal justice. And transferability to everyday life. So if I had to draw a picture of compassionate jurisprudence, this is what it would look like. It's a scale. That's the scale of justice. And on one side, we have the accountability piece, the sanctions, the rule of law, reason, case orientation, ego, reaction, perspective. You see, compassion is not inconsistent with these things. We can do both, okay? We can impose the sanctions that the law prescribes. We can apply the rule of law. We can use our power of reason, but we also can balance that with things like empathy. Reflection is on this side because one of the things the judges said was they really appreciated the opportunity to reflect on what they're doing day to day, to really reflect on it. So reflection is really important, and we need to balance that with reaction. Empathy is important. Yes, as a judge, you're the boss, okay? But you can be an empathetic boss. We can be people-oriented and not so case-driven. Intuition and experience is important. That was something that came up in the Sotomayor hearings. She was blasted for her, her comments about her experience in her community. Well, we all have experiences, and we all have gut feelings about things. And the worst thing we can do is pretend like we don't, because that is where we get into trouble. The best thing that we can do is put that intuition and experience up front, look at it, and ask ourselves, does it apply in this situation? That's where reason comes into play. So these concepts are not inconsistent with one another. And as I said, we're already doing compassion in courts. And so we can talk about compassion being soft. We can talk about compassion being not having a place in our courts or our justice system. But realistically, it's already happening. And my research demonstrated that. So where do we go from here? Compassion is a learned behavior. We can reprogram ourselves to be more compassionate. That is, if we buy into this concept. And I guarantee you, whether you're in traditional court or whether you're in a treatment court, your outcomes are going to be better if you engage in compassionate practice. Courts can be contentious and nasty. We see men and women acting badly, but we can learn, we can pay attention, we can use caring language, we can slow down, all in the interest of promoting humanity and ultimately justice. This model of jurisprudence challenges the status quo, which states that judges and court practitioners have to be dispassionate and devoid of emotions. We don't have to accept the traditional narrative of dispassionate justice. Compassionate jurisprudence levels the playing field. It recognizes our common humanity, because when one suffers, we all suffer. So I want to leave you with this. We're at the end of my journey. All of you who do work in treatment courts, not only do you contribute immeasurably and immeasurably to the well-being of the people you interact with, but your work is so much bigger than you think. As you grow and change and you become more humane, you spread that throughout the courthouse. And your behavior is a gateway to a more kind and just system of justice. You know, when we talk about procedural justice, it's how do people perceive us? Do they perceive us as fair? Well, compassionate jurisprudence can help address that perception of fairness. So I thank you for listening. You really are heroes, those of you who do this work. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain them. And okay, go ahead.
So there is a question in the Q&A and then some comments in the chat that I wanted to make sure were shared. And if you do have a question for Dr. Ortega, now is a good time to put it in Q&A, but there is one here. Do you feel that your observations, what you were talking about many slides back, I think, when you were observing the judges, do you feel that your observations were genuine interactions between judge and participant?
I do. I do believe that they were genuine. On several of them, I've actually gone back. I live here in Georgia, so I do interact with these courts. And I do feel that they were being their genuine selves. Even if they started off, and this was one of the concerns of my research, it's a bias. That's what you're getting to. You know, was there a bias? Were they changing their behavior because I was there? And I don't think so. I think after a while they forgot I was there. They may have started off thinking about it, but after a while they forgot I was even in the courtroom. So I don't think it did.
When you started talking about sort of that transition or that, you know, looking at taking some of these things that these recovery court judges are doing that you observed, and, you know, how do you do that in a traditional court? I threw out that question in the chat about, you know, our judges, and have they noticed that they approach their regular dockets differently? And several of them in the audience have responded in chat saying that they definitely have, since becoming a recovery court judge. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to if you think it's because of the training or the experience or the doing things differently has, you know, what you think it is. I would be curious to know that. But several of the judges, and I wanted to share some of that with you, like Judge Bailey. I think you responded to just us, Judge Bailey, but Judge Bailey said he's found that he has more compassion and understanding because of being a recovery court judge. So he's definitely approached it differently. We have somebody that says they've noticed that the judges in their district that run recovery courts have shifted the way they even handle their regular dockets. And certainly they have more compassion, and they focus on looking at alternative sentences now instead of just putting people in jail. And then Judge Humphreys also, he responded in chat saying that he's definitely changed his approach, and in working in criminal, juvenile, divorce, and order of protection dockets because of his training and understanding more about substance use disorders. Instead of trying to determine blame in some of those situations, the focus is on finding treatment for the parent or parent, and having a close relationship with the treatment provider in their area to get on a quick assessment and treatment access, which has also changed sort of the way custody issues become addressed, because they're able to maybe focus a little bit more on treating those parents and affecting the outcome of how custody issues get handled. So thank you for that. And then there's Judge Smith has weighed in that it's definitely changed the way that he does his regular docket. So quite a few of the judges in the audience are right there with you about that idea and practicality that you can move these compassionate components that are easily found in recovery courts and practice them in regular court. Let me check Q&A. So if you have nothing in the Q&A, if you have any more comments, drop them in the chat box and we can share those. Appreciate all of that though. A lot of folks in chat just saying, you know, it's great information. Would love to share that with, you know, more of the judges in their area, etc. Much needed information.
So my goal is that this paradigm becomes the rule and not the exception, which is why I do these presentations and these talks. And several workshops have been developed out of this research. So one of the things I want to say, a lot of times people ask me, well, how is this different than therapeutic jurisprudence or trauma-informed care, or all of the things that we talk about in the treatment world. And it's different because it focuses on you as an individual and your behavior. It's all about what you do, what you think, what you feel, because you cannot work in these courts, as the judges who commented today, as well as the ones in my research. You can't do this work without it changing you. So the question is, how do you want it to change you? Do you want it to change you for the better? Or do you want it to change you in a way that makes you bitter and hard and jaded? And I've seen both, and I honestly, as a defense attorney, treatment courts were a hard sell in the early days. But as I see how it changes people, not just the people that are appearing in the court, but it actually changes the people who are working with the people who are changing in the court. And I think that's exciting to me. I think it holds promise for a caring and a caring justice system.
I agree. It reminds me of the research that Judge Hora did, who's no longer with us anymore, where she did that pretty extensive qualitative survey of judges and asking them about how drug court has changed them, and just my personal experience talking to judges over the years. Something that's really common to hear is it really has made them want to be judges again. Sometimes it can be so hard watching people come through the door and feeling a bit helpless, or like it's hard to find a way to get them to stop coming back. And that recovery court is definitely one of those ways that they feel like they're really making a difference. Judge Cook, who has been mentioned a number of times. I don't know if you know that, Judge Cook, but you've been mentioned a number of times in the past couple of days. The commissioner mentioned you yesterday, and your minivan drive-by court, Dr. Ortega, in the COVID days, where Judge Cook was in the minivan with the side door open, doing court in the parking lot of the courthouse. But he says it's allowed him to be more able to treat litigants as individuals and not just a name on a docket. I think that's a good point too.
I wanted to share just two quick stories of something that I saw that I thought was pretty amazing. And I know all of you judges have seen this before, and treatment teams. So young person, 24 years old, bombed out of the treatment court big time. Just bombed out, messed up, bad. Judge had no choice, sent him to prison. And I'm in the courtroom, and this young man is standing in the back, waiting for the calendar to finish. And at the end of the calendar, he has permission from the bailiff to be able to address the judge. And the judge, and he says, "You remember me?" And the judge looks, and he goes, and she goes, "Yes, I remember you." And he says, "I know I messed up really bad, and I know I disappointed you after all those months in drug court, but I went to prison, I did my time, and I am out, I have a job, I'm clean and sober, and I'm starting a family. And Judge, I want you to know that every word that you said to me during my time in your court, I took to heart." That is a success story. It changed him, even though he did not successfully complete the program. And I just want to encourage you that every day that you touch someone, compassionately, it makes a difference whether you can see that result or not. And as a defense attorney, one of the biggest joys that I had in my life, it wasn't a joy. I mean, when I lost, it was always hard, but to have my client say to me, you know, thank you, thank you, thank you for caring enough to fight for me. I know you did the best you can. And that's because I saw them as people and I treated them as people. I saw their humanity and they appreciated it. So anyway, I'll leave you with those stories. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed being here, and I wish you all great success in everything that you do.
And we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I look forward to talking to you further after this about your workshops. Definitely want to follow up with you there. So you guys have a lunch break at this point. I think we come back at 1:30 for Ellen, the presentation with Ellen, which is going to be, or for Ellen, which is going to be sort of emotional for me. I don't know, but it's going to be important to do. And if you have not gone into Remo and checked out the exhibit space and just networked with each other there, this is also the time for you to be able to do that with each other. Go in there and see who is hanging out in there. Go talk to the sponsors, get on their little list so that we can put you in the little drawing to receive some additional gifts. And I appreciate each and every one of you being here and engaging. And I will see you at 1:30.